Thank you. Appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and start now, but I will also note that we are going to send out the link to the recording as well as all of these slides and a Google form to you all at the end. Want to give a big thank you to our partner organizations here, as well as the speakers. And just want to note that you will have questions, perhaps as a speaker speak. So hold them until the end, or just drop them into the chat. Logan Malik will do a Q&A session in the end, and we will try our best to answer your questions. So I will now kick it over to Logan. He is with MCAN, and we'll go into talking about municipal light plants and the importance of them.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. As Malia said, my name is Logan Malik, and I'm the Clean Energy Director here at the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And I'm so grateful that you all are here to join us. I'm so grateful to our wonderful panel of speakers for being willing to tell us all about their experience on the light boards, their respective light boards. During my presentation, I'm going to just make sure that all of the foundational information is kind of covered. I'm going to talk a little bit about what municipal light plants are, how they differ from investor-owned utilities, and why advocacy in MLPs, I'm going to start using MLPs for municipal light plants, is so important across the Commonwealth. So before I do that, I do just want to tell you a little bit about MCAN. MCAN was founded back in 2000, and we are an organization that is primarily focused on providing a network of expertise to help town level groups take action on climate locally. And we do this specifically, we have now 65 chapters across the Commonwealth. And we really work to provide them with the resources, the technical knowledge, and the support that they need. One of our key focuses is municipal light plants because there is so much opportunity to take action in these communities specifically. And for us, it's all about local action. We believe that there is so much power that can come from municipal level and slightly bigger. That's where all of the action and all of the change comes from, and then it bubbles on up. And that's what we're really focused on supporting. So with that being said, I do want to talk a little bit about what an MLP is. And in order to do that, it's important that folks understand that there are currently two types of electric utilities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There are investor-owned utilities, also known as IOUs. And these are for-profit utilities that are owned by private shareholders. When thinking of an IOU, what is an IOU? It's your National Grid, your Eversource, your Unitil. Those are the investor-owned utilities that operate in Massachusetts. And then you have the second type of utility, which is called a municipal light plant. These are nonprofit utilities that are owned and operated by their municipalities and at the community level. There are 41 MLPs across the Commonwealth. They provide services to a total of 50 municipalities across Massachusetts, and they represent about 14% of the state's total electricity. So not an insignificant portion. This is a map of MLPs, and it really gives you a sense of where they're located. And one thing that you might notice is they are everywhere. You have some located way out in Western Mass, some in Central Mass, on the North Shore, on the South Shore. And so there is a whole bunch of geographic diversity across MLPs. And as you might expect, because of that, there is also a whole bunch of diversity when you're looking at a numerous other factors. So, whether or not an MLP is in a rural community or an urban community, whether or not, the size of the MLP, some of them can provide services for 500 customers, others 40,000 customers. The breakdown of customers, the percentage of customers that are residential customers or commercial entities, at the income level of the communities that these MLPs are serving, varies significantly. So all of this just should give you a sense that these communities, while they are lumped in as MLPs, they are very diverse in the needs that they have, their interests, and their priorities. And in order to understand MLPs, it's really important that you understand how their governance structure is different from investor-owned utilities. So on the right side over here where my mouse is, you can see the investor-owned utility governance structure. And you see that there at the top are private utility shareholders. These are not your customers. They are instead private and individual investors that buy shares of the utility and then seek to essentially generate a profit through the shares that they have purchased. Now, these shareholders elect a board of directors, and these board of directors are then subsequently responsible for appointing a CEO. The CEO is then responsible for carrying out the day-to-day operations of the utility and ensuring that the needs and the interests of the private utility shareholders are met. As you might expect, these needs may differ from the needs of a customer, and they are actually primarily focused on getting large profit margins and ensuring just high annual returns year over year. This differs significantly from an MLP structure, which is shown on the left side, and you can see the top group is significantly and very importantly different. So instead of a private utility shareholder, they are the local community. And the structure is very similar to how you imagine, the structure of a local town. In a local town, you see that local community members elect a board of selectmen or a city council, who are then responsible in a town for appointing a town manager. And that town manager is then responsible for carrying out the duties and the mission of the board of selectmen, which is ultimately responsible to the local community members. With a municipal light plant and a municipal light board, it is very similar. In most instances, not all, a commission or a light board is elected by community members. And in other instances, they'll be appointed by either a board of selectmen or by a mayor or a city council. Once they are established, they are then responsible for appointing or hiring a general manager, and that general manager is responsible for carrying out the day-to-day operations and mission of both the light board and the community. But you can kind of see with the MLP governance structure, it all goes back to community. And that is a theme that I'm going to come back to multiple times. So this structure provides several unique benefits to MLP communities that are not available to communities that are served by investor-owned utilities. And the three of the benefits that I'm going to discuss today are the fact that residents play an important role in decision-making, that MLPs have the ability to prioritize the needs of their local community, and the third one, which is a little bit different, but nonetheless important, MLPs are legally permitted to own and operate energy generation. So there are several other benefits that I'm sure folks on the call are aware of, and that we could talk about numerous other benefits, but for the time being, I'm going to focus on these, and I'm going to discuss them in a little bit more detail. So the first is the community role in MLPs. As I mentioned earlier, the community is responsible for electing their light board or their commissioners. And this is the case in many communities where it's a direct, they are directly choosing who is on the board. In other instances, when they're not directly choosing, they are still choosing the people who are responsible for making that decision. So they have the ability to choose the makeup of those boards. They're also able to folks in these communities are able to weigh in on decision making, and they can do that through regular commissioner meetings that happen on a periodic basis, and that are available to the public. That is a useful way to kind of get your foot in the door, to understand what's going on in your MLP, and then to provide public comment. But it does go beyond that. Residents really are capable of affecting change in policy, operations, and investment through emphasizing their priorities and advocating for change. This is a unique piece of, I'd say more unique and a real benefit in MLP communities. These MLPs are a part of a democratic institution, of a local democratic institution. And the best way to keep a democratic institution healthy is through engagement. You can see tangible results if you engage in your MLP's regular operations in a respectful and productive way. And the reason why that engagement is so important and so valuable is that MLPs have the capacity to prioritize local needs. As nonprofit organizations, they don't need to only be thinking about the bottom line, about how much each decision is going to produce a profit. Instead, they can think about, well, what are the needs and the interests of my community, and how can we best achieve that? And so in many cases, what this looks like, MLPs prioritizing local needs, looks like providing local rates and resiliency. But it's very important to keep in mind that it does not only need to be those aspects. And I will say MLPs do a great job in keeping rates low. They have some of the lowest rates for customers in the state, as well as providing a resilient energy system. But we can, and residents can ask and call for different priorities, and that can include increasing the use of clean energy, ensuring that there are large and substantial energy efficiency programs available to customers, ensuring that we are mitigating climate change as effectively as possible. The list really does go, it can really be anything. And I think that is very important to keep in mind. Unlike these investor-owned utilities, MLPs really can prioritize the needs of their customers. The final benefit that I do just want to discuss is that MLPs can own generation. And so it might come as a shock to some, but the investor-owned utilities that we are all familiar with, the Eversources, the National Grid, they do not own their energy generation facilities. They don't own solar, they don't own wind, they don't own natural gas, coal, etc. Instead, they are focused primarily on contracting for those resources and then delivering those resources to their customers. MLPs, on the other hand, have the ability to own energy generation facilities. And this is a powerful tool, especially when we're talking about climate action. It's a powerful tool to increase clean energy generation. As we've seen, MLPs have been some of the initial, and leadership investors, if you will, who are kind of out in front. And I think a great example is the Berkshire Wind facility, which is the largest onshore wind facility in the Commonwealth. That facility is entirely owned and operated by MLPs and their associations. A key caveat is with this great power or this greater power comes a greater responsibility. So just because this increased capacity enables MLPs to an additional tool to increase clean energy doesn't mean that they are necessarily going to use it to invest in clean energy resources. In fact, they could just as easily invest in natural gas, coal facilities, what have you. Not to say that they do invest in coal, but so this makes it all the more important that residents get involved, that residents make it very clear that clean energy is their priority and that investments in clean energy is a must moving forward for their community. Again, community involvement is so central to an MLP taking action and making the right investments, changing their operations to address the climate crisis that we're facing today. So I've kind of talked about some of the benefits of MLPs, and I do just want to, before I turn the mic over to Larissa, I do just want to briefly discuss how MLPs are regulated differently, and as a result, the current action that is taking place in MLPs, specifically with respect to combating the climate crisis. So one of the things that we've seen since the formation of MLPs way back in 1892, I believe the first one that was established was Wellesley's Municipal Light Plant, is that the legislature has treated MLPs very differently from investor-owned utilities. Specifically, when it comes to climate change and climate policy, MLPs have kind of been left out of a lot of the key landmark climate policies that we see as foundational to addressing the climate crisis in the Commonwealth. And two examples of this is the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Clean Energy Standard. And both of these policies are really focused on essentially requiring that investor-owned utilities increase the percentage of clean energy that they distribute to customers year over year to ensure that we are transitioning in a timely manner. And up until 2021, when the Next Generation Climate Roadmap Bill was passed, MLPs had no such requirement. They did not, they frankly could have had 0% clean energy in their mix because they were exempted from these requirements. The Next Generation Climate Roadmap Bill took a very good and positive step forward by establishing an MLP greenhouse gas emission standard, or GGES for short. And this is a huge step. It essentially requires that MLPs slowly transition, or I should not say slowly, but that they transition to 100% or net zero by 2050. And there are interim targets that they have to meet in 2030 and 2040. But it is worth noting that this is a little bit less prescriptive than a policy like the RPS. And by prescriptive, I mean it includes a wider array of resources. So, what applies under this greenhouse gas emission standards include resources like nuclear, like high efficiency gas, things like that. So it is different, but definitely we've seen positive progress in this regard. Another area that I think doesn't get enough attention, I think the RPS and the Clean Energy Standard is discussed quite frequently, is that when it comes to energy efficiency programs, the regulations and requirements are quite different. So investor-owned utilities, as of 2008, they really had strict requirements. They had requirements around the percentage of their revenues that they needed to put towards energy efficiency, the amount of money that they kind of allocated that was going towards low income residents, specific energy savings goals, et cetera. There really are a number of requirements that these investor-owned utilities have to meet. And that is very different from MLPs. While there are some minimal standards that MLPs have to meet, the requirements are far less prescriptive. And that is in no means to say that MLPs are not doing great work in energy efficiency. It's just to say that they're not required to do this work legally. And so again, this gets back to my central idea is you, as a member of an MLP, you have a much larger capacity and ability to make change and take action that results in something at your local level. And also in some ways a responsibility, because without that action, MLPs may not be going as fast as we might like them to, or you might like them to in your community specifically. And this is one of the things that MCAN really works to support is, it's important that advocates understand what action is taking place, because it's not a standard across the board. What action is taking place in their community. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is through our MLP scorecard, which is something that we publish every other year. And it tracks and scores MLPs' progress in various different categories, such as energy transition, energy efficiency, transparency, and community engagement, which we believe is such a foundational part of climate action and a just transition. And so, as I mentioned, we do score MLPs, based on this progress, but scoring is really not the key part of our report. What we really like to highlight is the broader results and conclusions that were drawn from an analysis of the 41 MLPs across Massachusetts, as well as the recommendations. We really try to provide residents and community members with some guide, a guide for if you want to get involved, if you want to be a part of your light board, and you want to put forward a policy. There are some ways that you can kind of take a look at our resources and then decide, okay, this is the best thing that I can advocate for in my community. So I'll put the link to that in the chat, and you can take a look at that after this presentation. But I hope this gives you a little bit of an idea of kind of what MLPs are and why local action is so important. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Larissa Hallgren, a member of the Middleborough Light Board.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate being here tonight. And I was asked to talk a little bit about sort of how I came to be a commissioner here in Middleborough and some of the things that we're doing in Middleborough. And I really wanted to emphasize too, that I think just the action that a community can take by being involved, as Logan was saying, that's where really it all starts. And commissioners are just a facilitator of making that change happen that we hear from the community. But before I kind of delve into that, I should mention, the reason I got involved is I have a background in biology and science. I am a museum exhibition designer, and I work largely, and that's my profession, I work largely on exhibitions that promote environmental sustainability, environmental conservation, and energy efficiency. And I'm really focused on projects that mitigate climate change when we can convey that content to visiting public. And I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to work with National Grid, not an MLP, an IOU, that had a lot of money to create some very nice visitor centers that I was the designer of, and created some pretty cool exhibits, we thought at the time, to help engage the public in learning more about ways they could save energy at home and the benefits of electric vehicles and other things, again, that folks could do to really save energy and mitigate climate change. And that was great, but that wasn't for my community, right? And that was for an IOU. And I became involved with some wonderful people here in our town that were doing good things to bring about some change and to focus on topics of sustainability. And it seemed like a natural fit when I was asked to consider being a commissioner, to take sort of this desire I started to really feel more strongly, which was to bring some of the these programs that I was able to highlight through an exhibition for National Grid into the work that I did every day as a commissioner, if I was so lucky to become one here in town. As I think we do a lot of work to bring about change, but one of the really important things that I think doesn't always get noted enough is the super critical tool of communication between your light, in this case, Middleborough Gas and Electric, or whether it's Hingham Light or whatever it may be, and your community. So we can share stories to the public, to the ratepayers, and they can better understand ways that they too can save energy at home, how they can lower their bill, and how they can impact our climate by mitigating change. So again, that's what really was the driving impetus for me. We can have the next slide. The process, of getting involved and saying, I'm going to do it, I'm going to run for a position in town, was one that was really not all that difficult. And I would really hope that a lot of people would take on this job if it's something that they are thinking about. What really makes a difference is, of course, encouraging people to vote. Voter participation is key. That's how we get our residents involved. And to Logan's point, Logan, you said specifically that it's one of the jobs of the residents is to share their voice. And they do that specifically by expressing who they want to vote for. I will admit I was incredibly lucky. I ran unopposed. So I was very fortunate in having that be the case. But really the effectiveness, once I became a commissioner, I realized wasn't about how I wanted to deliver a message or how I wanted to work on the topics I was passionate about. It's really how I worked with the team, the bigger team of commissioners, and with the general manager of Middleborough Gas and Electric. That's critical. I think being a good listener and still pushing for your points is the strategy we all have to take when we are commissioners. Listen to the public. I certainly have a lot of residents call me, write to me, send me messages, and ask me to either share a topic with them by explaining it a little bit more or connect them to the right person, which is more what I often do, or to just hear their concerns and be able to bring that forward in the work I do. We have a great community here in Middleborough. There are a lot of progressive advocates that are thinking about how to mitigate climate change, how to save energy. There's a very strong organization, Sustainable Middleborough in town, that's thinking about that. And there are a lot of folks that aren't engaged yet that want to get involved in these topics. So again, we have a good community. I can't say enough, though, the value of having a really good listener for a general manager. Our general manager here in town is Jackie Crowley. She does a wonderful job of really hearing lots of different topics, taking time to work with me as an individual commissioner, I'm sure the others, to really kind of advance our interests and get in a dialogue with us on those topics. The next slide. While I've been a commissioner, which has only been a year now, there have been a couple of topics that were important to me that we've been working on. One is a low income rate. We have not had one in Middleborough. We do have a senior rate that's been in place for a long time, and our rates are very good overall. As Logan said, MLPs can offer very, very good rates. But even with all that good stuff, I felt that it was really important that we look to integrating a low income rate. And that is going to take place. We're working on the rate structure, and that will happen either the end of 2022 or early in 2023. I just checked in with Jackie to validate that. We also have been a big concern of mine was to increase the amount of money that's available for energy saving solutions and incentives. And we've increased that budget pretty substantially over the past year. So I want to talk about that a little more in the next slide. And we've also been really looking at finding ways to increase programming and support for our renters, particularly those in the environmental justice area of Middleborough. And we've been doing that by working to encourage landlords to invest in order to do energy saving upgrades. And that helps the renters and that helps them save energy and save money. So those I think are important topics. There are other things, of course, that I'm really interested in, but these are the things in a year that we've been focused in on the most in our dialogue as commissioners. My next slide. And this is a slide that you're going to see in a minute that I think is really fantastic. It summarizes our energy program budgets in town and takes a look over the last couple of years. And if I could kind of draw your attention to the topic that I was most interested in, and that is increasing that budget that's available for incentives over the past year. The budget for 2022 is up 25% for funds that will be made available in town. and pretty significant truly since 2018, which of course was not a time I was a commissioner. But it, again, I think shows the good work that the commissioners and the general manager have been doing for a period of time by listening to our community, hearing what they're saying they need and responding. So by no means is this something I'm responsible for. I'm just a player that helped push this forward. And I'm really thrilled that our budget is going to be as significant as it is for some of these programs in the coming year. Again, I think there are a lot of really good things happening here in town. I think other towns with munis are also doing some fantastic things. But I want to go back to Logan's point before I close. I think it's truly the incredibly unique opportunity we have as residents to impact our communities and really see that we can bring about some change, and we can keep pushing that dial toward more actions that are positive for our environment, that are going to help us tackle this ominous problem of climate change and what's going to happen if we don't bring about change really quickly. Then our voices really can make a difference, whether you engage as a commissioner or you're a voter or you're somebody who just turns out to meetings and asks questions. That's all really good stuff. That's my 2 cents. I'm being a commissioner for 1 year. So I think with that, I'll pass it over to Laura, who's got wonderful things to share with you as well from Hingham.
Thanks so much, Larissa. Excuse me. I am a commissioner in Hingham. Let me just get me going in the slideshow mode here. And I don't know if you can see this well enough, but so I was also asked to talk about why did I get involved in working on the light plant? Why would I run for office? What were my goals? And so I think that the first question that everybody always asks me when I talked about change at the light plant is why? Why do we need change at the light plant? Because the Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant is incredibly popular. The rates are very low. Our reliability is very high. During a storm, you can drive through the nearby towns and it's all dark, 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 dark until you come to Hingham, poof, the lights come on. And that has a lot to do with being a municipal light plant town where we're don't have to share our repair services with all the towns around. Eversource is trying to serve all their towns, National Grid, all their towns, but we know exactly what we need to take care of our town, and so it's available. People feel like, hey, you know, the light plant is fine just the way it is. So why do we need change? And my answer is that if only I can figure out how to keep going, we're going to have change at the light plant, whether we want it or not. And we can get to that first by knowing that back at the town meeting in the spring, Hingham's town meeting set a goal that we would have net zero carbon emissions by 2040. And that is a very aggressive idea. And when you think about that, having net zero carbon emissions means first, we have to get rid of all of our fossil fuel use. And how will people be fueling the things that they now fuel with fossil fuel? Obviously, by electrifying those uses. So that is going to have major impacts for us. Things are going to change about our profile, about how our customers use their electricity. So once everything is electrified, if you really want to have net zero carbon emissions, obviously your power supply has to be net zero as well. And it has to be an emissions-free power supply. Right now, our power supply is at 55%. So we have ways to go, and we have to figure out how to get there. And of course, if everybody electrifies, there's going to be increasing demand for electrification. And that is going to require changes in our distribution system, maybe in the transmission that comes into the town. It's something that's seriously going to require planning, because everything about how people heat their homes will change, and it's going to be on the light plant to figure out how to deliver those services that are going to be so much in demand. And finally, we all know that the energy markets are undergoing a tremendous amount of change right now, and everything about what's available and what we can buy is volatile, and it presents some serious planning challenges. And this is all new. So this is all change that's coming, whether or not we want it to. So why did I run in particular? My background, as is relevant to this, is that I served on the town of Hingham advisory committee, which is the finance committee, for 6 years. And following that, I served on the select board for 2 terms. And at the end of that time, I was asking myself what I would do. And I decided, so this is 2013, I decided that I was just going to work on climate change, probably for the rest of my life. And when it crossed my mind that our light plant had a central role here in our town for how we were going to approach that, I started asking myself what changes are required. And I just listed some of them. And then I noticed that the change wasn't happening. And I began attending light board meetings and kind of getting a feel for how it went. And I thought that we could make improvements on making the changes that we need to in the future. Another reason why I ran is that I had the backing of Hingham Net Zero, which is our local climate action organization that has been in existence for about 3 or 4 years. I'm a member, and we were looking to run somebody for the light board for the reasons that I've just mentioned. But it's very important, if you're thinking about running, that you ask yourself who in your community is going to help you. Where are the sources of support and energy that you're going to need? Unlike Larissa, I ran against a 20-year incumbent. So that was a somewhat larger challenge. And so I needed a lot of help, and you could see it in this picture. So I looked at all of the changes that needed to be made, and I came up with my campaign message, which was the first 2 things have been the key task of the light plant since 1895 when it was founded: reliability, affordability, or as our former general manager used to say, lights on, cheap. And last fall, fortunately, the light plant added a commitment to sustainable operations and a 100% carbon-free emissions power portfolio at some point in the future. And so the light plant had already added the sustainable goal, and I was just running to make all of these things go forward. So that's why I chose that campaign message, and it's probably applicable in most MLP towns. So I just want to say a little bit about what I've been working on since I was elected last spring. One of my first projects was to get with the town and the schools to talk to them about how we could get some solar projects built on municipal buildings. We have a brand new middle school that was built solar ready, and there are no solar panels on it. And when you dig into why that is, you discover that it's actually more complicated and difficult than you might think to make that happen. The question is, who is going to pay for it? Who's going to own it? Who buys the electricity? Who sells the electricity? And what is the model for how you're going to finance building these things? Turned out to be more complicated than I'd hoped, but I'm continuing to work with some volunteers to come up with a proposal about what is the best way to finance these kinds of projects and go forward with it. So I am working on that. And together with the light plant engagement group of Hingham Net Zero, we've designed a program that we're proposing to the light board and the light plant. By we, I'm wearing my Hingham Net Zero hat right now, called Electrify Hingham, which is kind of a boring name. And if anybody can think of a better one, I'd be happy to hear it. But the idea is that there will be one-stop shopping for support for your plan to electrify your fossil fuel uses. So there will be a place on our website where you can come and get all the information you need about what are the rebates and incentives that are available, who might some contractors be who you could get in touch with. What is the process for putting solar on your roof that involves the light plant, and how do we do that? And fortunately, before I got on, this was underway before I got on the board, but the board just hired our first sustainability and communications coordinator. Getting back to Larissa's point about how important communication is, that has not been a sterling quality of Hingham Light up until this day. And finally, we are putting the resources into communications that it needs to have, because that's what really our role is going to be with the community around electrifying. Is we're going to need to communicate with them what's the need and how are they going to go about doing it. So the general manager has agreed to review the proposal, and we're going to meet with him and see if we can hammer out something where Hingham residents can have a place that they can rely on to go for the best information about the electrification process. And of course, we're going to need that plan for 100% carbon-free power supply. And we've had some studies and some conversations, but that also turns out to be very difficult when you think about it. Originally, I thought coming in, we just need a plan. then I realized I can look at our contracts and say, well, this contract's expiring in 2026. What are we going to replace it with? And the answer is we don't know, because we don't know what renewables are going to become available in the market. And so you have to start thinking about ways that the light plant can prepare itself to be ready to jump on opportunities that come on the market. We don't know what they're going to be, but we have to keep vigilant to them. And right now we do have a commitment to buy as much affordable renewable energy as comes on the market. And we've just got to keep pushing forward with that. And finally, a project that was underway when I got on the board is we are going to upgrade our transmission. We have all of our electricity comes in on one set of poles from Weymouth, 2 circuits on one set of poles. And if those poles go down, if one of those poles go down, the whole town goes down. And in fact, that has happened in the past. And so for a long time, the light plant has been planning to build a new transmission line underground from a different point on Eversource, where we previously connect with Eversource through another route through Weymouth. And we'll need a new substation also for that. So that was very important for reliability. But everyone has come to realize over the last year or two that also, if we're going to electrify everything in town, we need to have literally more electricity coming into town. And we're going to need this transmission upgrade just to meet our sustainability goals as well. So that is a matter that has to go before town meeting, because light plants can't bond for themselves. And so one of the roles that I'm playing as a former select board member is helping the light plant and the light board move this project through town meeting, which is not something that light plants generally have a whole lot of experience with, because they don't have to deal with town meeting in that way. So that's something that I've been working on pretty strenuously. So I guess I just want to share with you my point of view. Municipal light plants are literally power to the people. We can use it, we can get control over it, and we can make our towns what we want them to be. We can tell our grandchildren that we took a look at our town and we did what needed to be done. And I hope you'll join me in this project. And I look forward to seeing what questions people have. But now I'm going to turn it back to Malia, who is just going to finish up for us.
Great, thank you, Laura. So of course, we have heard a lot about the ways that MLP board members can make a difference, right? We heard from Logan, to Larissa, to Laura. And I think it really encapsulates the importance of these elections and the folks that are deciding to run. They're incredible policymakers, and they have a lot of tremendous amount of power in deciding for, deciding how we get our energy in terms of clean energy decisions in each town. This impacts not only you, but this impacts your neighbors, this impacts your friends, this impacts your family. So it's really significant. And if you don't know who should run, sorry. Okay, I think the slides got a bit mixed up. So as I was going to mention, if you don't know who is on your MLP board, you can find out by going onto MCAN's website and look up who is on there. And if you see that, they aren't doing anything that you agree with, they're not advocating for you, I highly encourage you to run, and please do reach out to me if you decide to. ELM is a huge partner in supporting folks that decide to run. And if you do have any thoughts, any inclinations, where if you want to learn more about it, you can reach out to me. My email is at the bottom there, MCAN at environmentalleague.org, and I'll also put it into the chat. But yeah, I would love to plug you all in any way that you want, even if you're not deciding to run, you aren't even thinking about running. I would love to see what we can kind of work through. It's important that you all are here and are engaged. And I love to see all the faces on the screen today. So we can go into some Q&A. I know I saw some questions in the chat.
Great. So I saw several questions come in, both to me personally, as well as in the chat writ large. But if folks do have any questions at this time and they want to put them in the chat, or they want to raise their hands, go ahead. In the meantime, I am going to choose a few questions that have already come up. And the first one is going to be from Janet Sinclair. And she asks, does each MLP say where their energy is coming from? Does anyone care to take that? Laura or Larissa?
So, yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. It is certainly a matter of public record because these are public entities. And so if they haven't put something like that on their website that says what their contracts are or anything like that, you can request that information and they must give it to you.
I think one thing that I'll add to this, just because this is a big area of focus for MCAN, we strongly believe, as Laura said, that every single MLP should both have their power supply and their energy mix listed on their website. And I'm not going to kind of get into the details, but of kind of how those things are different. But I think that, you know, it just goes back to transparency. These are democratic institutions. We need to keep that in mind when we are advocating, you know, in our MLP communities. They ultimately are serving you as the resident. And so transparency is so important to ensuring that. And so every MLP should be transparent about their energy mix and their power supply. Larissa, was there something else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just was trying to find it quickly and I did just come across it. So Middleborough Gas and Electric, our website does have a page called Our Energy Supply Mix, and it's titled How Your Energy is Produced, gives a little background on that and gives a reporting of the sources of energy. We also review where the energy is coming from in our monthly meeting, our monthly commissioner meetings, as we get a reporting from the general manager. So that's public record as well. So you can always tune in and listen to the meetings and hear a little bit about that. So agree with you. Transparency is fantastic. And again, I think that's about communication, right? I think there are a lot of people that don't even recognize that our energy is coming from lots of different sources. When I talk to folks out in the general public, when you go about town, they're often surprised by that little bit of information. So sharing that gets people asking more questions. They get involved. Engagement is really critical for us to have any kind of big change. We have to get folks thinking about everything from every angle. So I think it's a wonderful question. And I hope everybody can find this information on their town's websites.
Great. I see another question, which I think is great for from Stephen, which is what are the Middleborough and Hingham MLPs doing, as well as other MLPs doing to install EV charging stations?
So hard to speak for other MLPs, but Hingham just won one of the state grants for installing EVs. It was the light plant that applied for it, and there will be 3 chargers installed in public locations. I'm very anxious that we have a conversation on our light board about what's the right place to install EVs and what's the highest priority. We are largely, you know, a bedroom community of single family homes. And then we have now increasingly a bunch of large apartment buildings of 200 or 300 units each. And those are the residents who don't have access to charging at their homes. And I am glad to have EVs chargers to put at our public locations, but to tell you the truth, that may not be the place that they would get the most use. So I would like to focus on how are we going to work with the owners of those very large apartment buildings to find resources for them to install EV chargers, and that's a priority of mine.
In Middleborough, I'll chime in. We've had some charging stations go in over the past couple of years. And in fact, we just opened a brand new high school that's in town this month. And there are charging stations even at the high school, which I think is a wonderful thing, that they're there for students, staff, parents, who's ever doing, spending some time at the building. And in many of our downtown locations as well. So they're certainly here. And I know that there's discussion of fast charging stations and that sort of a thing as well. So it's happening, and very much are supporting the implementation of those as well.
I want to just add quickly that in our scorecard, this wasn't a key focus, but it's going to be something that we focus more on as things go forward. What we did monitor and we did see a lot of is MLPs provide typically rebates for residents to install charging stations in their homes. And that was really positive thing to see. Another positive thing to see, I think that this is kind of MLPs thinking ahead of the curve, is rebates for electric vehicles. If you have an EV and you have a charging station, you actually kind of got a discount if you charged your vehicle on an off-peak time. And I think that as this was mentioned, as we continue to electrify, the energy demand is going to increase, and we want to ensure that we're being smart and we're incentivizing community members to charge their EVs at a time when demand is not at its peak level in the day. So I think I saw a question. Was there anyone, if anyone has their hand raised or wants to put their hand up, please feel, I think I see Elizabeth. If you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, so thanks so much. This is super informative. So I just want to say thank you for having this, because in my opinion, like, going local is so important. So I wanted to just ask sort of, to everyone who is on their MLP, like, what did you learn about the value of going local versus, like, I feel like we get so much negative news nationally, or I don't know, that's my opinion. So I was kind of like, what did you learn from just like being a local leader, like on the environment? Yeah.
I learned something that I think is really important, which is that I mentioned that I've been working in climate action for 7 or 8 years and kind of spinning my wheels a little bit. And then 3 years ago, when we founded Hingham Net Zero, something changed, and all of a sudden people in my community started dropping out of the sky with talents and experience and things that they wanted to contribute. And I've come to conclude that when people think about the climate crisis, they just can't get their heads around it. It's too big. They feel defeated. But when you say to them, okay, but our town, we can do our part. Let's focus on what our town needs to do to be responsible citizens. You can do this with me. It's about our town. And people respond to that enormously. And it shakes them out of their despair and gives them the feeling that there really is something that they can do. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I have a very similar experience, and I have a short story. I interviewed for a project. Again, I'm a museum designer, about 10 years ago at a zoo. And I was asked to design an exhibition that would talk about the climate crisis, and it would be alongside a beautiful polar bear, living polar bear. And the executive director said to me, how the heck are you going to get people to pay attention to this terrible doom and gloom story alongside a polar bear? And I thought, good question. That's a hard one. How do we do it? And I have found again and again and again that it's been really difficult to talk about this topic to people when we think about it on the global scale, when we talk about what's happening in the Arctic, when we talk about these distant places, it feels overwhelming and people often want to look away. They don't know how to begin and how to make a difference. So to Laura's point, I think I've really heard people getting excited about what they can do in their backyard, what they can do in their home, their community. And that's really energizing for me and really empowering. And I think we can take that energy and really roll with it and bring it forward. So it's that local work that really has been just a catalyst for me to feel extremely excited about these hard topics again, where I felt a little daunted by them, to be honest, over the course of my professional career.
That's great. Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, I'm really big I'm in Newton. I'm like really big in the Newton climate action scene. So it's been really nice during the pandemic, learning from there's so many people who are engaged locally, and it's so inspiring and motivating and empowering. Yeah, so thank you. That's great.
Great. And I think we have time for one more short question. If anyone has a short question, wants to briefly unmute or just raise their hand, and I will try to spot you out.
Logan, if it's okay, I'd like to speak to the question that's in the chat. from David Hall, who is not from Massachusetts.
Go
And
for it.
he wants to know how to do this in your state. And of course, here in Massachusetts, the most important thing that we found for founding municipal light plants is that it should still be the 19th century, because that's when most of these institutions were created. And there is communities here do have the right to buy their distribution system and become municipal light plants towns, but they are somewhat at the whim of what the IOUs are willing to sell that stuff to them for. So we are, there are towns that would like to go this route here, and we are fighting the same fight that you are, and I don't think we have the answer.
And just to add to that, I think the solution there is legislation and basically changing the law to, the major issue with this is just that Eversource or a National Grid or any investor-owned utility can charge as much as they want for that infrastructure that communities would be buying. And so that makes it just, the hurdle is way too high for basically any community to clear, because there's no incentive for investor-owned utilities to sell their infrastructure. And so there is legislation in the Massachusetts state legislature to essentially ensure that there is a fair price for whatever communities try to request, and that Eversource or a National Grid is required to put out a fair price, but that so far has not been passed into law. And so we're in the same position that you are in, as Laura said. Great. Well, I think with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank our panelists and all of the organizations who spent so much time putting this together. I want to thank everyone who came out. And as Malia said, if you're interested in learning more about becoming a light board member, feel free to contact her and the folks at ELM.
Hey, Logan, there's some more questions in the chat. Do you think when we send out the slides and so forth that we could try to gather those up and maybe answer some of them?
Yes, I think we can work to put something together. So I'll save the chat and we'll see what we can send out and try to answer some of the remaining questions that we didn't get to. Thank you so much again. It's been a real pleasure, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening.